Hi again, and welcome back to session number 5. This week we focus on styles. Styles is a rather large topic, so we have divided up the material into 2 sessions. Today we will focus on the fundamentals, and next time we will look at the interrelationships between all of the styles. So without further ado, let's look at those fundamentals. Let's start this time by thinking about a coach in an individual sport like tennis. One of the things a good tennis coach is going to do first is make an effort to understand your strengths. Are you more of an offensive player, someone who looks to take charge of the points and push your opponents around the court? Or are you more of a counterpuncher, someone who looks to run everything down and make the other guy beat you? The reason why a good tennis coach would do this? Well, so he could help you leverage your strengths and win, of course. We bring this up now because it is important to establish a certain point early on in this styles discussion. Namely, any style can win individually. If you look at the 2 men here, the one on the right is Roger Federer, and he dictates the points and pushes people around the tennis court. The person on the left, Rafael Nadal, is the fastest man in the world on a tennis court, and he simply does not beat himself and runs every tennis ball down. Federer and Nadal are 2 of the greatest men's tennis players in the history of the sport, and they could not play the game of tennis more differently. For just a bit more context, let's consider now a team sport like, say, soccer. A good coach in that sport starts out by evaluating where each player should be on the field in order to help the team win. Is this player left-footed or right-footed? Better at offense or defense? Is the coach doing this to pigeonhole his players? Of course not. He does this in order to get each player to the best spot on the field for what he or she does best. The point here, all styles are critical, and there is no reason to want to be something you are not. Let's just find out what you do well and focus on strategies for winning, whether you play by yourself or on a team with others. Now, as you are getting a sense, the true purpose of styles is to focus on your strengths, to come from a strengths orientation. This can run a bit counterintuitive to what people are used to, what our habits are, which is to approach things more from a weakness orientation. Consider a report card like this. If you brought this home, what did everyone focus on first? Yeah, typically the lowest grade. Well, we are not trying to be naive and say, hey, don't pay attention to your weaknesses. That would be foolish. Instead, we just want you first to focus on your strengths and see if we can't find a way to leverage those. Speaking of focus, ours today specifically is on 2 things. Purpose number 1 is you. To the extent that you can find your style, you will be able to play better to your strengths and have some guidance for intervening in certain bad habits associated with your style, all an advantage in the marketplace. Purpose number 2, and let's be clear here that while this is purpose number 2, it's the more important purpose, and that is to focus on those around you. Once you know your style, which as we've been saying really is no big deal, we can set it aside, open our eyes and ears, close our mouths, and zoom in on how to address other people's concerns more gracefully. Strategies begin to automatically emerge for things such as how to design more effective presentations, who to send to certain meetings, how to work better with our colleagues, and how to take things a bit less personally when there are breakdowns, all of which will accelerate your prosperity. For just a few seconds, we must talk about 2 things that you are not allowed to do with Market Force styles. These are critical and they are absolute no-nos. No-no number 1 is, do not use styles as a way to shield yourself from accountability. Just because your style might not be the optimum one for a particular task, if you need to get it done or your team needs you to do it, please do not shield yourself by using Market Force styles as an excuse. That move will only hurt your standing with your colleagues. You can and should look for ways to hand off to others, but don't pretend like you live in a laboratory and try to avoid your accountabilities. If it's a requirement for you to do it, please do it. The second no-no is, please do not use styles as a sword. What this means is, please do not walk up to others and start throwing around words and distinctions about them that they don't understand. Such behavior is offensive, truthfully, and there's no reason to stab others with what you are learning here. In other words, similar to the table we went through regarding language for action versus language for no action, Keep a similar mindset as it relates to styles. You can either execute on what you learn about styles, or you can just talk about styles. You can either use styles to help you be more performative with others, or you can just sit in an idle conversation about styles. You can either use styles to coordinate action, or you can use the tools as a way to try to avoid accountability. And if you think someone is an authority, just execute on what you are learning and grow your personal brand with that person by bringing some strategies to the table. If you just walk up and stab that person and talk about how they're an authority person, you will do nothing but produce a negative viewpoint from them. Again, this table is similar to what we discussed on performative versus judgmental speaking, and we want you to be executing on styles, not just talking about them. The final note then, before we dive in, is to point out that style does not equal personality. Many people, when they are first learning styles, think we are claiming that every control person or every influence person has the exact same personality, that they are somehow cookie-cutter personalities. We're not saying this at all. Instead, we're claiming that a style is a shared concern amongst a group of people, especially when pressure is introduced into the environment. A personality, on the other hand, is how an individual of any style deals with that concern. So some control people may be more outspoken than others, but all controls, we would claim, share a similar concern for certainty when there is pressure. Hopefully this makes sense because it's important. A quick visual is to consider that there are 4 rather large umbrellas, and all of us stand under one primarily as we feel more tense. It doesn't matter which one you stand under unless you can't see it, in which case you may fall victim to certain of your habits when you feel pressure. But we are not saying that you are exactly like every other person of your style. That would be, in a word, ridiculous. With all of that said, let's dive in. And diving in means turning to the grid in your workbook. That's our deliverable for this discussion. As you look at the grid, you notice we have all 4 styles across the top, with viewpoints, liabilities, and assets down the left. We're going to walk through each style for a few minutes in order to deepen the distinctions that you see in front of you. Let's start with control. The nickname, as you can see, for a control is a director. So these people are people who believe they were not born into a crib, but rather into a director's chair. They will do things like sit at the head of the table, even when they are not in charge. Don't take this personally, but where else do you sit when you think of yourself as a director? When they feel more pressure in the environment, they begin to dictate to those around them. This typically sounds like, hey, here's what you should do. We affectionately refer to our controls as shoulders. They should all over everyone. By saying should, they are in a sense declaring what everyone else should be doing in the future, and making declarations for controls is more natural than any other style. Next, please note that control's operational time frame is 5 years out into the future. They are very forward-leaning individuals, wanting to talk more about where they are going than from where they have come. If you look 3 spots over to the right, you will notice that authorities have an operational time frame of the past, meaning that this style more typically likes to look at evidence or trends to help them make decisions for moving forward. Just looking at these 2 time frames, would you think that controls and authorities more naturally get along or more naturally fight? Yeah, these 2 styles have a tendency to fight when they cannot see where the other is more naturally coming from. Moving forward, let's look next at the second row under viewpoint called promises mean. Next to that phrase, please write down the word sincerity and then draw a line from promises mean connecting down to the 4th distinction under liabilities called survival conversation. And below survival conversation, please write down looks like real risk. Keep things simple. The reason we connect these 2 is when we have to promise, we feel pressure. Each style's survival conversation, then, is the greatest pressure to that style. If we correlate those 2 things, we can predict the sincerity level of how each style will promise. Let me show you what we mean. See, for controls, yes equals maybe and no equals no. Since control's greatest concern is, if someone knows that I don't know something, I will die, then every time they say yes, they are only saying maybe. If I go home tonight and come up with a better idea, I will change direction tomorrow. It is critical then, in a practical context, to understand that when dealing with controls, you are best to get any of their promises, big or small, in writing. Next, let's skip down to competence versus sincerity. the last row under viewpoint. Next to this subtitle, please write down the word trust. In every culture and in every industry, trust is so critical. Well, if you will recall, we claimed early on that people see in language. So if trust is so important, we had better be able to distinguish it so that we can create it more often in our relationships with others. Our claim then is trust is equal parts competence and sincerity. If you look at any relationship where you have assigned trust, you believe in the other person's ability to perform, their competence, and that what they are saying out loud is the same thing they are saying to themselves. They're sincere. All of us need to see proof of both to assign trust. However, the rank order between the two is different based on styles. Controls and authorities need to see competence first, then sincerity, while influences and powers need to feel sincerity first, then need to see a demonstration of competence. As a bit of a test here, what do you think your clients focus on first, competence or sincerity? Yeah, that's a trick question, of course. The right answer is that it depends on their style. If you automatically answered competence or sincerity, that might be a better indication of your style than the styles of your clients. Moving on now to liabilities, beginning first with what each style confuses with accomplishment. Now, if we look at that entire row, if we're going to be successful, then we need to have some good ideas, the ability to create some good relationships, the endurance to replicate and produce on what we promise, and the good sense to review and reflect on occasion to see what's working and not working. The problem is when each style focuses solely on what is in their column, which is what we do when we feel pressure. For control, this means thinking that the idea is the only thing we need to be successful. So this is the person you know who has 37 plates spinning at any one time with all of these great ideas, but is not bringing any of the ideas down from concept into reality. To go around the map here, influence, this is the person in your office who knows everyone in town but hasn't closed a deal in 10 months because they're too busy maintaining the relationship to ask for the contract. Power has a different issue. They get into a routine and won't break from it, even if a slight variation could make them more successful. Sounds like this. Hey, Mr. Power, how's it going? Great. Are we making any money? I have no idea, but I'm really busy. And finally, authority. This is the person who has analysis paralysis. I'm sure you've heard that phrase before. The guy or gal you know who overthinks things to the point that everyone around them just moves on without them. The point is, we all have issues. For control, the liability there is to think that coming up with the idea is the only thing we need to be prosperous. Nope, that just gets us started. Back to the table then, let's look at the emotion each style will typically project in a breakdown. Oftentimes when there is a breakdown around controls, they will focus outward at how other people screwed up. What didn't you understand about my idea, stupid? Even if they don't say those exact words, it comes across that way as a bit arrogant. Influences, well, they just want to move. So they will many times become impatient when things slow down, causing them to sacrifice themselves just to get some momentum back in the process. Powers, well, they get frustrated at all the things they are tolerating but won't confront, so they end up complaining to others about those around them who are not pulling their weight. And finally, one of the biggest complaints you will hear often from authorities is, no one's listening to me, so they just tune out, become indifferent, and then show up later when it's time for an I told you so. As we said, we all have our issues or liabilities. With that said, let's turn our attention back to assets and start with controls. With all of the attributes described for controls, where would the best spot on the field be for these players? Good question. From our vantage point, these are big picture, systemic thinkers, good at helping to set the direction for a team, the intention, and there is many times a lot of wisdom in what they can see about the future, if you can set aside taking things too personally. Many times these people take on a specific role in marketing or strategy development for the team, even if not in title, but only in action. So there you go. That's an overview of control. See what you think for you and others around you. Next, let's focus on influence. Now we can cover the influence style in 3 words. Ready, fire, aim. No, not literally, but this style typically moves quickly, sometimes thinking, what could happen? Let's go. More often than any other style, influences are often facilitators, liking to put the pieces together, most often those pieces being people, in order to get things initiated. It is this desire to get things started that will lead many influences to want to migrate when there is pressure in the environment, as they view what happens after the relationship is started as boring. These are people who focus on freedom, always wanting more and more flexibility in their lives, which means they end up using the word could a lot. Oh sure, I could help you out with that. Not even realizing that all of those coulds sound like promises to others, especially powers and authorities, causing them to end up with a reputation, if not careful, of being flaky. Their operational time frame is moment to moment, right now, as the word plan does not seem to exist in their vocabulary. While if you look next door at powers have the operational time frame of 90 days out, which means they are looking to put points on the board and deliver tangible results on something. Just based on that difference in perspective, do you think these two might naturally get along or naturally fight? Yep, you got it again. They have a tendency to fight. One wants to make constant changes, influence, and the other wants a structure, power. And if they're not careful, they will push each other out of the team if they can do it. Again, back to the grid, and for influence, yes equals maybe and no equals maybe. Maybe, as they are constantly worried about getting boxed in or being told what to do. As it relates to trust, influences are sincerity first, competence second people. If there's no professional friendship, they don't care how competent you are. As we discussed, influences often value relationships over accomplishment, sounding like this. Hey, Mr. Influence, how's that job coming along? Great. Oh, so we got a contract? No, but I do have another golf game set up with the guy. Finally, under liabilities, their emotion projected in a breakdown is impatience. Again, let's go. In terms of assets, influences are typically good relationship starters, which means they are good at doing sales. They don't typically like routines, but they do like challenges or missions, and they are a bellwether for a team in regard to the mood. This means that if the influence person is excited, they can often get the entire team excited. On the downside, if they're in a bad mood, many times they can crater the entire mood of the team. And finally, their cardinal virtue is courage or valor, which just means they are often early adopters and are first to volunteer for new things. And there you go, a quick overview of influence. See what you think for yourself and for others. Now let's shift over to power. Power people are typically builders. They love to have a lot to do and often equate real value in their lives to how busy they are, which means they don't like to take vacations unless they are sick or get into a car accident. That's a joke. Powers tend to have an ability to tolerate more work than the other styles, driven by the fact that they value highly stability and don't want to rock the boat. This shows up in their speaking as talking about all that they have to do in order to keep the business afloat, and they often have to-do lists for their to-do lists. Going back to their natural linguistic performative, powers like listening for requests. Is this person asking me to do something? And if no one is asking them to do anything, they often feel left out and bored. Their operational time frame is 90 days out. Remember, points on the board, that's their focus, not the long-term 5-year perspective like controls. That sounds like smoke and mirrors. And they are sincerity first, then competence when it comes to trust. Liabilities then for power. Well, we mentioned they often confuse being busy with accomplishment. Think of power as the overt resistors to change because they like how they are doing things. Authorities, by the way, are the covert resistors to change. For powers, yes equals yes and no equals no. But their survival conversation is, if I'm not included, I will die. Can you see how these two distinctions reconcile? It's tough at first, but think about this. Powers have a habit of never saying no. See, if your concern is for being included, then whenever someone asks you for help, your natural habit will be to say yes. This can really hurt powers if they're not observers of the habit, because they will overextend and not be able to deliver on everything they have promised, causing them to complain often of how frustrated they are with all that they have to do. Turning to assets for power, powers are typically great for putting together winning structures, ways to work together in alliances that allow for more to get done. Their focus on production is natural, and they are justice or fairness based at their core, meaning that if someone is being mistreated, typically the first style to be upset will be a power. So there you go, power. Do you think you could be power? If you are multitasking while listening to this podcast, chances are high. Finally then, let's look at authority. Authorities are your natural analyzers. We call them see-mores because they often want to see more data and see more data. When there is pressure, they default to hibernation, which does not mean putting their head in the sand, but it does mean trying to slow things down a bit so that they can think through the situation to get to the best conclusion. Their operational time frame is on the past, meaning that they want evidence and data so that they can get comfortable or secure about making the right decision going forward. Their natural linguistic performative is to make assertions, claims with evidence, because they are constantly sifting through all of the evidence. So when you listen closely to authorities, you will often hear them discuss what someone ought to have done in a prior situation. For authorities, their yeses equal yes and their nos equal maybe, which again is driven by their survival conversation that says, if I have to decide without all of the information under the sun, I will die. Similar to the power reconciliation earlier, can you see how these two distinctions correlate to each other? How about this? If powers struggle to say no, authorities struggle to say yes. So maybe you have a client right now who keeps wanting more and more and more information, and the more you provide, the further from a decision he gets. Chances are you have an authority client, and you'd better have a strategy for dealing with him, or you'll be in that transaction forever. Liabilities for authority? Well, we discussed earlier this concept of analysis paralysis, which means that authorities typically will overanalyze something if they're not careful, to the point of asking questions about the minutest of details. In breakdowns, they often disappear from the group into their own office, causing those around them to feel as though the authority person is indifferent to the concerns of others. Turning now to assets, again, what is the best spot on the field for someone with these natural qualities? Well, these are typically discerning individuals who like to bring quality control and standards to a group. They are often good at making sure that things are being followed up on, administrative, even if they don't like to do the administration themselves. Oftentimes authorities can see issues that the other styles will overlook, that need to be confronted if the team is to grow and learn. And finally, typically authorities are a bit more prudent than the other styles in terms of how much money or time should be invested into some new project. So there you go, that's authority. Dealing with anyone like that right now in your life? Okay then, we did it. We got through the fundamentals of styles. Hopefully that wasn't too painful for you, and chances are you have some questions. Feel free to make a note of those and be prepared to discuss at our upcoming meeting. And with that, we're done. Except, of course, for your practice assignments. You know the drill. We want you to be as happy as this gentleman to work on yours this week. Please plan to complete those assignments no later than end of business the day before our next application meeting. We will look forward to it. Thank you for listening, and now it's time to get back in the game.